Alright, welcome to the second video of the first semester. I would like for you to have out your Unit 1 packets, and if you could flip to the learning goals with me. What we're going to be focusing on today is in the content. We're going to be focusing on number 2 and number 3, which is the colonists struggling for political identity, and then we're going to start to get into the natural rights versus imperial loyalty. And what I have on the screen for you right now, I would like to have had one that maybe was moving, but this is just an image of a pendulum, and you know a pendulum swings back and forth. And the reason that I have this image for you, what I want you to attach to this image is the treatment that England gives toward its colonies. That is how England interacts with its colonies. And I am going to explain even further tomorrow, and we're going to talk more about this pendulum effect of English treatment. And what I mean by that is there are times in the relationship where England is all over the colonies, where they are passing laws, where they are governing them tightly, where they are making their lives seemingly more difficult than maybe it needs to be. And then there are other times where the pendulum will swing back the other way, and England really isn't involved with the colonies at all, not whatsoever. And what that leads to is a confusion over what is supposed to be the relationship. So for example, I put this cartoon on here, right? So you guys are probably well familiar with curfew, right? And when it comes to curfew laws, you know, you get this guy standing out here, there's a time, and right here it's not a crime, 10:57, 10:58, 10:59, boom, all of a sudden it's a crime. Those times probably aren't right, but you understand what I mean. This is how the colonists are going to feel frequently, where they're doing something, and while they're doing it, it's fine, you know, it's legal, it's welcome, it's common practice. Let's say it's, you know, governing themselves or doing things in the colonies to take care of what they need to take care of. But every once in a while, England will come in and they'll make a law that changes the way that the colonists are doing things, or the way that the colonists are operating as normal. And that change, that pendulum, is going to have a dramatic impact on the relationship. And so when forced to fight side by side, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, and I didn't have you do the reading on the French and Indian War because we're not going to get into great detail, but the results of fighting side by side allows England and the colonies, that creates the scenario where they begin to learn a little bit more about each other. And what you read about last night in pages 98 to 105 is the results of what they've learned about one another. And so where I want to start here, you know, is just a quick review. And I'll flip between these two pictures. And surely I'm hoping that at this point right now, all you have to do is see these images, and you understand why I am showing them. You understand how I would use them to explain mercantilism and economic roles. And so here you have the colonial economic role, the extraction of raw materials, and here you have the British economic role, producing the finished goods. And of course, this is what the colonists are selling, and this is what the English are buying, and this is what the English are selling, and this is what the colonists eventually will have to buy. And if it's that simple, the economic roles, we can understand that. But what gets more complicated is when you start to add time, and you have the colonists in the New World for an extended period of time, and England and their ability and willingness to take care of their colonies, to govern their colonies, doesn't necessarily live up to maybe what the colonists were expecting. And the colonists, in a sense, have to learn how to fend for themselves. So let's just review one more time this idea of mercantilism, right? The beauty of British mercantilism. And remember, if we looked at our fishbone exercise, the number one reason for the purpose of these colonies, the primary purpose, is to make England money. And so the beauty of British mercantilism, England gets the resources, England gets the wealth. And we know that wealth equals power, and so they're adding power too. They added something, of course. They added this idea of a transplant society, English people living in their colonies, and that adds a market. And if you remind me tomorrow in class, I'll talk a little bit about the Irish and how they factor in. What made them different Okay, what makes them different? And when I say them, I mean the colonists and the English. So that what brings them together is the fact that they have this economic system that they're living under. The reason that the colonists are even there is to provide the raw materials to allow England to become more profitable. But what makes them different is from time to time, England has their own problems. And I have just one example here, and I can give you other examples. But one example is in the middle of the 17th century, England has a civil war. And during that civil war, obviously, England is preoccupied with what's happening at home. When they're preoccupied with what's happening at home, they aren't paying that close of attention to their colonies. Okay, that's understandable. But, and this is where it's really important for what you read last night and for how that ties into what I'm trying to explain to you. I'm sorry, what you read yesterday in class and what I'm trying to explain to you tonight. And that is, England has expectations of their colonies, but then when they back away, so something like the Civil War, they're focused on what's happening at home. They are ignoring their colonies. And we can't just, we have to assume that the colonies are going to do what they need to do to survive. And so this is the key point right here, right? The colonies begin to develop what I call, and what we can call, self-sufficiency. They start to take care of themselves. They start to fend for themselves. For example, if they needed to import tea and England wasn't exporting tea because they were too busy fighting the Civil War, the colonists aren't just going to go without tea. They're going to find ways and places and partners to get tea from. And so, for example, during the English Civil War, the colonists begin to trade with Dutch tea companies, right? This makes sense. They want tea. They need tea. This other person, this other country is selling tea. They buy it from them. But what I want you to think about, and maybe either take a note on how you understand it or write a question in that bottom middle column, is how is this a problem for mercantilism? How does it reveal to us some of what you read about, where the colonists begin to see themselves as something different than what the English see them as needing to be? And so this is an example of the pendulum swinging this way, where the British just aren't paying attention to the colonists. The next slide is the pendulum coming back. And so after the Civil War, we have the reunification of England. We have a king that is put back on the throne. They try to put themselves back together again. And one of the things that they realize they need to do is they need to get back to making money. And when they begin to examine what's happening in their empire, they realize, well, there's a lot of money to be made in the colonies, but right now, they're trading with the Dutch. They're kind of making their own stuff. They're starting to figure out that they need to make it on their own because we haven't been taking care of them. Well, the pendulum comes back, and the English begin to pass laws. They begin to, the specific laws that I'm not referencing here are called the Navigation Acts. They begin to reassert their authority. And the purpose of this is to get mercantilism back in line. And the colonists, they're a little aggravated, but at this point, and this is early, this is the late 1600s, early 1700s. They're aggravated, but they're not defiant. They understand that this is their role, and they're happy to get back in the process of making the money they were making before. And so they may have to deal with some laws that they don't necessarily like, but if it leads to making more money, they're all going to be happy with that, both England and the colonies. But these are just two examples of the pendulum swinging back and forth. Something that I want, and I throw this in here just so that I remind myself and you, we have to remember that the idea of mercantilism is to benefit the wealth and power of England, not the colonies, of England. And that's important, because if England wants to pass these laws to get the colonies back in line, they believe they have the right to do that. This is the New World in 1754, and what this map shows you, and I'll see if I can make it a little bit bigger. This map shows you, you have Spain, you have France, and you have England. And what's gonna happen here is that England and France are gonna fight a pretty significant war from 1754 to 1763. We call it the French and Indian War. And in it, the British are going to win, and they're gonna look a little bit more like this after the French and Indian War in the New World. All of this land is going to go over to the British. This seems good. This seems good for the colonists. The activity that we're going to do in class tomorrow is going to focus on this perspective, okay? If the British, and write this question down, because this is what we'll start with in class tomorrow, right? If the British fought a war in all of these red spots to gain all of these red spots, and the colonists participated in that war only here and only focused on gaining this. Okay? So the British gain all of this and the colonists gain all of this. Whose goals are more important? If England looks at this map and says, we got this, but it cost us too much money to get it, so we're going to have to be slow about how we go about using it. And the colonists say, we've got this, and we want to go there now. Who's right? And I want you to think about this from a couple of perspectives, and this is what I want to start with tomorrow. Think about it from how we've talked about mercantilism and what mercantilism is supposed to be. And also, look at your notes on the left-hand side, your reading notes. What are you seeing in there that maybe could lead you to the answer as to what the colonists are going to justify their stance of, we should be able to do this now, and how do the British justify what's going to become their stance of, no, we're going to worry about the big picture and we'll tell you when you can do the things that you want to do over here. So that's going to be our jumping off place for tomorrow. We're going to use that as kind of our springboard into our second fishbone activity, which you'll be helping me to fill out. The first thing we'll do tomorrow, though, is we will finish the fishbone activity on the purpose of colonies, and then we'll move into this relationship piece.